I always believed my marriage was solid, built on trust and understanding. Sienna and I had been together for years, and while we had our ups and downs, I never once thought she would betray me. Looking back, maybe I should have noticed the small changes. The late nights at work, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she started guarding her phone like it held state secrets. But I ignored the signs, chalking it up to stress, routine, or just my own overthinking. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It crept in, little by little, a series of moments that didn't make sense. The night she came home late, smelling of expensive cologne that I didn't wear. The way she pulled away when I touched her, her smile a little too forced, her laughter a little too hollow. I wanted to believe she was just tired, that I was imagining things, that nothing was wrong. But then, I found the first real clue. It was a Sunday afternoon. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to take a shower. Normally, I wouldn't even think about touching it, but something gnawed at me, an unease I couldn't shake. I glanced at the screen. A message preview popped up. I miss you already. Last night was incredible. My stomach tightened. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me. I picked up the phone, unlocking it effortlessly. She had always trusted me enough not to set a password. That was her mistake. The conversation thread was short, but it told me everything I needed to know. A series of messages, filled with flirtation, anticipation, and worst of all, familiarity. Whoever this was, he wasn't some random fling. He was someone she had been seeing for a while. My vision narrowed as I scrolled up, and then I saw the name. Daniel, my stepfather. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing at first, just an empty, detached sense of disbelief. It didn't make sense. Daniel had been in my life since I was a teenager. He had married my mother after my father passed away. He had always been around, always present at family gatherings, always the man who shook my hand and asked about work. And now, he was the man who had been in my wife's bed. I put the phone down carefully, like it was something toxic. My mind raced, trying to piece together how long this had been going on, how deep the betrayal ran. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. It was the sheer audacity of it. The two people closest to me, lying to my face, thinking I would never find out. When Sienna came downstairs, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp, she smiled at me like nothing had changed, like she wasn't living a double life. I looked at her and felt nothing but disgust, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. If she thought she had fooled me, I would let her keep thinking that, because I wasn't going to confront her right away. I wasn't going to scream or demand answers. No, that would be too easy for her. I was going to destroy her, and she wouldn't even see it coming. I spent the rest of the day pretending nothing had changed. It wasn't easy. Every time I looked at her, I saw the messages, the deception, the way she had smiled at me while sneaking around with my stepfather like it was the most natural thing in the world. It made me sick, but I didn't let it show. If she had spent months playing me for a fool, then I would return the favor. I forced myself to sit across from her at dinner, listen to her talk about her plans for the week, nod at the right moments, even laugh when she said something funny. It was surreal, watching her go about her normal routine while I sat there, fully aware of what she had been doing behind my back. At one point, she reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You've been quiet today," she said, her tone laced with concern. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." She nodded, squeezing my hand gently. "You work too hard." The hypocrisy was almost laughable. Here she was, acting like the devoted wife, while another man, my own stepfather, had his hands all over her. I wanted to rip my hand away, tell her I knew, watch the blood drain from her face as she realized the game was over. But I wasn't ready for that yet. Not until I had more. That night, she fell asleep next to me like nothing was wrong. Her body curled into mine the way it had been for years. I lay there awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her steady breathing. The weight of what I had discovered settled in my chest, heavier than before. This wasn't some stranger she had met at a bar, a moment of weakness she would later regret. This was Daniel, someone who had been in my life for years, someone I had trusted. I had so many questions. How did it start? Who made the first move? How long had they been sneaking around? Had they done it in my house? Had they sat across from me at family dinners, exchanging glances while I remained oblivious? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I would get my answers soon. The next morning, she left for work, kissing me goodbye like any other day. I waited until she was gone before grabbing her phone from the nightstand. I knew the password now. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. More messages. More proof. Yesterday was too risky. We need to be careful. I hate sneaking around like this. I can't stop thinking about you. There were no names in the texts, but I didn't need them. I knew exactly who she was talking to. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, but I stopped myself. I needed to be smart. Instead, I took screenshots. I sent them to myself, then deleted the evidence. If she thought her secrets were safe, she would slip up again, and I would be watching. That evening, I made a move. "Hey," I said casually as we ate dinner. "You've been working a lot lately. We should take a trip, just the two of us." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "A trip?" "Yeah, a weekend away. Somewhere quiet. We haven't had much time together lately." I watched as her mind raced, calculating. Was she free to leave? Could she disappear without it raising suspicion? Would Daniel be okay with it? She smiled, setting her fork down. "That sounds amazing. I'd love that." Liar. She thought this was a chance to reset, to ease whatever guilt she felt. She had no idea I was setting her up. She agreed to the trip too quickly. The hesitation was there, hidden behind her smile, but I saw it. She was calculating, wondering if she could disappear for a few days without raising suspicion, weighing whether Daniel would be okay with it. She thought I was clueless, that this was some attempt on my part to reconnect, to salvage whatever she thought had been slipping away. I let her believe it. I let her think she was still in control. She had no idea I was already 2 steps ahead. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay in bed next to her, scrolling through my phone like everything was normal. But I wasn't looking at social media or emails. I was staring at the screenshots I had taken from her phone, reading through each message again and again, letting the anger simmer without boiling over. The more I read, the more calculated I became. I needed more. More proof. More details. I wasn't going to rush this. The next morning, she was up early, already packing a small bag. She hummed softly to herself, moving around the room like a woman who believed she had just secured her marriage again. The guilt must have been gnawing at her, pushing her to play the role of the perfect wife. It made me sick. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. "You seem excited," I said. She turned, her smile bright and fake. "Of course. It's been a while since we took time just for us." I nodded, watching her carefully. She was lying so effortlessly. How many times had she done this before? Had she told Daniel she loved him the same way she told me? Did she look at him with the same expression, laugh at his jokes, moan his name in bed while still coming home to me? I clenched my jaw, keeping my voice steady. Yeah, we needed this. I saw the relief in her eyes. She thought she had me back. We left that afternoon, driving out to a quiet cabin by the lake, the kind of place couples go when they want to reconnect. She held my hand during the drive, resting her head against the window, sighing contentedly like a woman who had just escaped something dangerous. But she wasn't escaping anything. She was walking right into it. When we arrived, she looked around, taking in the secluded area. "This place is perfect," she murmured. "No distractions." I smirked. Exactly. That evening, we cooked dinner together. She poured wine, laughed at my jokes, leaned into me every chance she got. She was putting in extra effort now, trying to erase whatever guilt she carried. I played along, matching her energy, giving her the illusion that everything was fine. I needed her comfortable. I needed her relaxed. I needed her to believe this was just a trip to fix our marriage. She didn't check her phone once. That told me everything. By the time we settled into bed, she curled up against me, pressing soft kisses against my jaw. "I love you," she whispered. I stroked her hair, my lips brushing against her forehead. "I love you too." Liar. She sighed, content, drifting off to sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing that when we got back, Her life would never be the same again. I woke up before her. She was still curled up in the blankets, her breathing soft and steady, looking peaceful, innocent. It would have been convincing if I didn't know the truth. I watched her for a few moments, trying to remember what it felt like to trust her, to love her without doubt or suspicion. But that feeling was gone. Now, all I felt was cold calculation. I slipped out of bed quietly, grabbing her phone from the nightstand. She had always been a deep sleeper, never one to wake up easily. I unlocked it without hesitation, my fingers moving quickly through her messages. Nothing new from Daniel. She hadn't texted him since we arrived. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Maybe she was trying to stay in control, trying to prove something to herself. Or maybe she was just waiting for the right moment to sneak away and check in with him. I scrolled through her deleted messages. She must have thought she was being careful, but she wasn't as smart as she believed. There they were. Texts she had tried to erase. Messages she thought no one would ever see. I hate being away from you. I wish I was with you instead. It feels wrong pretending with him. I gritted my teeth, staring at the words, letting them sink in. She wasn't just cheating. She was emotionally gone. She was with me physically, but everything else belonged to him. I set the phone back down, exhaling slowly, forcing myself to stay composed. This wasn't the time to lose control. I went outside, sitting on the deck with a cup of coffee, staring at the still water of the lake. The air was crisp, the morning quiet. It was almost peaceful, except for the storm brewing inside me. I needed to make my next move. The trip was working. I could feel her slipping into a false sense of security, but I needed something bigger, something final. She came outside a few minutes later, wrapped in a sweater, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "You're up early," she murmured, sitting beside me. I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. "Couldn't sleep." She leaned her head against my shoulder, sighing contentedly. "This has been nice. Just us." Liar. I kissed the top of her head, letting my lips linger for a second. "Yeah, it really has." She smiled, pulling her knees up to her chest, staring out at the lake. "I don't want to go back yet." Of course she didn't. Going back meant reality, and reality meant consequences. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. "Then let's not think about that yet." She squeezed my hand, exhaling like she had been given permission to stay in this fantasy a little longer. She thought she was safe. She had no idea what was coming next. We spent the rest of the day like any other couple in love. At least, that's what she thought. I let her believe it. She stayed close to me, her hands lingering when she touched me, her laughter coming a little too easily, her eyes softer than they had been in months. She was trying so hard to convince herself that everything was fine, that this trip had fixed us, that whatever guilt she had been carrying had finally faded. But I knew better. She wasn't at peace. She was just pretending, the same way she had been pretending for months, lying to my face while sneaking around with another man, while sleeping with him. I let her think I was fooled, let her believe her little act was working. I even played into it, making her feel like we were reconnecting, like I was the same man she had manipulated before. We spent the afternoon walking by the lake, her arm wrapped around mine, her head resting against my shoulder. She kept saying things like, "This is exactly what we needed," and "I've missed us like this." Every word out of her mouth was a lie, but I nodded along, pressing a kiss to her forehead, telling her what she wanted to hear. I watched the way her body relaxed, the way the tension drained from her shoulders. She was convinced now, convinced that I still loved her, that I was still hers. That was my plan all along. That evening, we built a fire outside, sitting on the deck with a bottle of wine between us. She curled up beside me, her fingers tracing small circles on my arm, her face glowing in the firelight. I could feel the warmth of her breath against my skin as she whispered, "I love you." I looked at her, my expression soft, my hand reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I love you too." "Liar," she sighed, closing her eyes, resting against me like she had finally let go of whatever was haunting her. She didn't know I was the one haunting her now. I let the silence stretch between us before I finally spoke. "I was thinking," I said, my voice low, almost thoughtful. "When we get back, We should have dinner with my mom and Daniel. Her entire body stiffened. It was so subtle that most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. Her fingers stopped moving. Her breathing changed. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to see it. She covered it quickly, forcing a smile as she looked up at me. That sounds nice. Liar. I smiled back, brushing my thumb over her cheek. Yeah. It's been a while since we all sat down together. It'll be good for us. She swallowed. Yeah, definitely. She thought she was keeping it together. She had no idea she was already starting to fall apart. And when we got back home, I was going to make sure she shattered completely. The drive home was quiet. She was staring out the window, pretending to be lost in thought, but I knew what was really happening inside her head. She was overthinking, calculating, trying to find a way out of the inevitable. She hadn't checked her phone the entire trip, and I knew why. She was afraid. Afraid to see what Daniel had said. Afraid that I might notice if she so much as glanced at the screen. But she couldn't avoid it forever. She was going to have to face reality the moment we got back. I kept my hand on the wheel, my expression neutral, acting like I hadn't noticed her growing unease. Let her sweat. Let her wonder if she had really gotten away with it. I played the part of the husband who had just had the perfect weekend with his wife, humming along to the radio, tapping my fingers against the steering wheel, keeping the atmosphere light. The calmer I was, the more it would unnerve her. When we pulled into the driveway, she exhaled softly, almost like she was bracing herself for something. She turned to me, her smile forced but hopeful. That was perfect, she murmured, reaching for my hand. Thank you for this. I smiled back, my grip tightening slightly around hers. Anything for you. Liar. She leaned over, pressing a kiss to my cheek before grabbing her bag and heading inside. I followed behind her, watching as she moved around the house, setting things down, exhaling like she was trying to shake off the weight of the last few days. Then, finally, she picked up her phone. I pretended not to watch as she unlocked it, but I saw the way her body tensed the second she did. Her shoulders went rigid. Her breath caught. And then, just as quickly, she tried to act normal, her fingers moving quickly, deleting messages before she even had time to fully process them. But I already knew what they said. Daniel had been panicking. Where are you? Why haven't you answered? We need to talk before it's too late. Your husband is acting strange. I don't like this. I could only imagine how sick she must have felt reading those words, how hard her heart must have been pounding, realizing that something was slipping out of her control. She deleted them all, put her phone down, and turned to me with another one of her forced smiles. I think I'm going to take a shower. Of course she was. She needed to be alone, needed to breathe. I nodded, keeping my expression soft. Go ahead. I'll unpack. She hesitated, just for a second, like she was trying to decide if she should say something. Then she nodded and disappeared upstairs. The moment I heard the water turn on, I grabbed my phone and sent a message to my mother. Dinner tomorrow. Just you, me, and Daniel. I need to talk to you both. Then I deleted it from my side. By the time she came back downstairs, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone like nothing had happened. She walked over, standing in front of me, searching my face. You sure you're okay? I smiled up at her, reaching for her hand. Never better. She let out a soft breath, nodding like she wanted to believe it. She had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, she was different. I noticed it the second she woke up. Her movements were slower, her touches more deliberate, her eyes lingering on me just a little too long, as if she was trying to read my mind. She was nervous. The tension she had ignored during our trip was now creeping back in, sinking into her skin. She had checked her phone late at night when she thought I was asleep. I had felt the shift in the mattress, heard the barely audible taps of her fingers moving too quickly across the screen. She had deleted every message from Daniel, but it didn't matter. I already knew what they had said. She was trying to fix this, trying to regain control of a situation that had already slipped too far out of her hands. I played it cool, stretching as I sat up, running a hand through my hair like I hadn't spent half the night planning my next move. Morning, I murmured, my voice groggy. She smiled softly, leaning over to kiss my shoulder. Morning. Sleep okay? I nodded, turning to look at her. Yeah, best sleep I've had in a while. She visibly relaxed, exhaling like she had been holding her breath. She thought she was in the clear. I let her believe it. The day passed in a blur of careful observation. She was trying too hard, clinging to me in a way she hadn't in months. She kissed me for longer than necessary when she left for work, sent me texts during the day that she never used to send. Thinking about you. Can't wait to see you later. It was pathetic, really. She was trying to overwrite her guilt with forced affection, hoping it would be enough to distract me. It wasn't. That evening, she came home with takeout, her excuse being that she didn't want me to have to cook. I smiled, thanked her, kissed her cheek, and sat across from her as we ate, watching the way her fingers fidgeted with the napkin in her lap. You've been quiet today, she said after a few minutes. I shrugged. Just thinking. She forced a laugh. About what? I looked up, holding her gaze for just a little too long. Family. The color drained from her face so fast I almost felt bad for her. Almost. I let the silence stretch, watching as she swallowed hard, as she forced a small smile. That's nice, she said carefully. Speaking of family, do you still want to have dinner with your mom and Daniel soon? I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly. Yeah, tomorrow, actually. She froze. She tried to play it off, nodding quickly, smiling like it wasn't a big deal. Oh, that's soon. I didn't realize we had made plans already. I nodded, taking another bite of my food. Figured it was time. It's been a while. She nodded back, her eyes darting away, her hands tightening into fists on the table before she forced herself to relax. She wasn't breathing right. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. After dinner, she was quieter than usual. She stayed close, but I could tell her mind was somewhere else. She was unraveling, her nerves betraying her, her thoughts running in circles, trying to figure out if she should be worried or if she was just being paranoid. By the time we went to bed, she curled into me like she had on the trip, pressing herself against my side, trying to hold on to whatever she thought she still had. I let her, because tomorrow, when we sat at that dinner table, everything was going to fall apart. The next day, she was restless. I could feel the tension in every movement she made, every glance she stole in my direction. She was trying to act normal, but failing miserably. Her hands trembled when she poured her coffee. Her eyes darted toward her phone every few minutes, though she never picked it up. She was waiting, waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for the moment everything would fall apart. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her move around the room, sipping my coffee like I didn't have a single worry in the world. You okay? I asked casually, keeping my voice light. She forced a smile, turning to me. Yeah, just tired. Liar. I nodded, setting my mug down. You're not nervous about dinner tonight, are you? She blinked, the forced smile faltering for just a second before she shook her head. Of course not. Why would I be nervous? I shrugged. No reason. Just figured it might be a little awkward, considering how long it's been since we all sat down together. Her fingers curled around the counter. Yeah, I guess so. She was barely keeping it together now. As the day passed, I let her sit in her anxiety. I could see her mind working, playing out every possible scenario in her head, trying to figure out if she was walking into a trap. I never gave her a clue. I stayed calm, relaxed, even affectionate, touching her more, holding her longer, kissing her like I had never seen the messages that had destroyed everything. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to believe, just for a little longer, that she still had control. By the time we left for my mother's house, she had convinced herself that she was overthinking. She squeezed my hand in the car, smiling at me as if she needed the reassurance just as much as she wanted to give it. I smiled back, kissed the back of her hand, kept my grip firm around hers. She exhaled softly, like she was finally allowing herself to relax. She had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side of that door. The moment we walked into my mother's house, the air felt heavier. My mother greeted us warmly, but I saw the way she glanced at Daniel, her smile just a little too tight. She had noticed something. The doubt had started creeping in, even if she hadn't fully formed the thought yet. I watched Sienna carefully as she hugged my mother, as she turned toward Daniel. Her smile was forced, her posture too stiff. She was overcompensating, trying too hard to act normal. Daniel barely looked at her. Good. Dinner started off like any other. Small talk, polite conversation, laughter that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. I let it stretch, let the illusion linger. I wanted them both to feel the weight of what was about to happen. Then, at the perfect moment, I leaned back in my chair, swirling my wine in my glass, and said, Daniel, you've been pretty busy lately, huh? The shift was immediate. Sienna's grip tightened around her fork. Daniel hesitated just for a second before nodding. Yeah, work's been hectic. I nodded like I believed him. Funny. Mom said she hasn't seen much of you. Late nights? His jaw tightened. Yeah, you know how it is. I smiled, finally meeting his eyes. Yeah, I do. Silence. My mother looked between us, her brow furrowing. James, what's going on? I ignored her, keeping my eyes on him. You ever get that feeling, Daniel? Like something's off? Like something's happening right in front of you, but you don't see it until it's too late? Daniel didn't answer. Sienna was barely breathing. And then, before anyone could say another word, I pulled out my phone, opened my messages, and slid it across the table. Why don't you explain these? My mother picked it up first. I watched as her face paled, as her hands started shaking. She covered her mouth with one hand, her eyes darting between the screen and the two people sitting across from her. Then she turned to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. Tell me this isn't real. Silence. Sienna was staring at the table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles were turning white. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. I can explain. I laughed. A real, sharp, bitter laugh. Yeah? I'd love to hear it. My mother's breathing was shallow, her entire body shaking. How long? She asked, her voice breaking. Sienna finally looked up, her lips parted like she wanted to say something. But no words came. Daniel hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. And that's when everything fell apart. My mother's hands trembled as she held my phone, scrolling through the messages I had saved. Her breath hitched, her knuckles turning white as she absorbed each word, each betrayal laid out in front of her. Across the table, Sienna sat frozen, eyes locked on the wood grain, her face pale. She wasn't breathing properly. Daniel, on the other hand, exhaled slowly, already preparing his defense. How long? My mother's voice was barely above a whisper, but it sliced through the silence like a knife. She wasn't looking at Daniel. She was staring directly at Sienna, the woman she had embraced as family, the woman she had trusted. Sienna opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked like she was trying to find the right words, but none came. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. That's a great question. I turned to my wife, tilting my head. How long, Sienna? Her fingers clenched into fists in her lap. James, I shook my head. Don't start with that. My voice was calm, but I could feel the pressure building inside my chest, coiling like a snake waiting to strike. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Look, this isn't what you think. Stop, my mother cut in, her voice shaking. Don't you dare try to twist this, Daniel. Silence. Sienna sniffled, her shoulders shaking slightly. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. That's the worst part, isn't it? You weren't thinking about me at all. I tapped my fingers against the table, staring at her. Tell me, did you ever feel guilty? Ever think about what you were doing? Or was it just so easy to lie to my face every single day? Tears slipped down her cheeks. I swear, You swear what? I leaned back. That it didn't mean anything? That it was a mistake? I gestured to my mother. Because he already told her the same thing, and I don't think she's buying it either. Daniel rubbed his face, exhaling sharply. We never wanted it to happen like this. My mother let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. So you did want it to happen, just not like this. She pushed her chair back, standing up so abruptly that the table rattled. How long, Daniel? His jaw tightened. It's complicated. Complicated? My mother's voice cracked. You were in my house, sitting at my table, sleeping in my bed, and you were doing this behind my back? Sienna sobbed into her hands. I felt nothing. Daniel stood, running a hand down his face. I should go. Yeah, I said, standing as well. You should. Sienna's head shot up. James, please, just listen. I grabbed my keys. No, I've listened enough. She reached for me, but I stepped back, out of reach. Pack your things before I get home. Her breath hitched. Wait, no. You made your choice, Sienna. My voice was steady, my decision already made. Now live with it. And then, I walked out the door, leaving it all behind. I didn't go back home that night. I couldn't. The idea of stepping into that house, the one we had built together, the one that now felt tainted with betrayal, made my stomach turn. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring past as I tried to make sense of everything. But there was no making sense of it. There was no logic in what they had done. They had made a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice, and now they were paying for it. At some point, I pulled into a hotel parking lot, checking in without thinking, without caring where I was. I just needed distance. From her, from him, from everything. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, staring at my hands, waiting for the anger to settle, for the weight in my chest to lift. But it didn't, because even after everything, even after exposing them, after walking out, a part of me still felt like I had lost something. I finally turned my phone back on. I had turned it off after leaving my mother's house, knowing that the flood of messages from Sienna wasn't something I was ready to deal with. When the screen lit up, I wasn't surprised to see dozens of missed calls, unread texts. I scrolled through them without responding. Sienna, please, just talk to me. Sienna, I can explain. Sienna, come home. We can fix this. Sienna, James, please. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, I went back. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of dragging this out. I wasn't going to let her cry, beg, or try to manipulate her way back into my life. She had already made her choice. When I walked through the door, the house felt different, quieter, emptier. I found her sitting on the couch, eyes swollen, face pale, looking like a shadow of the woman she had once been, the woman I had once loved. She stood when she saw me, opening her mouth like she was about to speak, but I held up a hand. Don't. Her lip trembled. I just want to explain. There's nothing to explain. My voice was cold, detached. You lied. You cheated. That's it. Her shoulders shook. But I love you. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. You don't get to say that anymore. She sobbed then, her hands covering her face. I should have felt something. Sympathy. Sadness. Nostalgia for what we had. But all I felt was relief. I want you gone, I said finally. By the end of the day. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just nodded. I turned away from her, walking to the bedroom to pack what I needed. I didn't want to stay in that house any longer than I had to. It wasn't my home anymore. A few hours later, I left for good. 1 year later, I never saw her again after that day. She moved out, left the city, disappeared from my life entirely. I never asked where she went, never checked up on her. She had become nothing more than a memory, a lesson learned. Daniel didn't get off any easier. My mother divorced him immediately, took everything she could, made sure he had nothing left. I heard through mutual friends that he lost his job not long after. Karma had taken care of the rest. As for me, I moved on. It wasn't easy. There were nights where the weight of everything still crept in, where I found myself replaying moments in my head, wondering how I had missed the signs. But I didn't let it define me. I built something new, something better. And one day, I met someone else, someone who actually knew what love meant. And this time, I made sure I chose right.